Well, first of all, agreements always need to be uh, implementable, monitorable, and no agreement is 100% secure. And by the way, there is no perfect security in this
Y-
world or in
y-
this universe,
Yeah,
and so Israel doesn't get perfect security when the rest of us live under insecurity of many kinds.
yeah,
Everybody faces, as I think it's the second law of thermodynamics, everybody faces insecurity. We all face entropy. We
entropy.
all
I like it.
face, yes, we all face all of the uncertainties and principles of
Mm,
degradation. You have to
mm,
keep building in order to keep order. So, this
mm.
is the first point. The second point is that this is a political process mostly among nation states, in my opinion,
Uh-huh.
which is we need the major countries to operate responsibly under the UN Charter. And that means Saudi Arabia needs to sign on, Iran needs to sign on, Egypt needs to sign on, Jordan needs to sign on, UAE needs to sign on, Qatar needs to sign on. Now, I talk to those diplomats all the time. They will sign on, actually. They
Iran will
will
sign
sign
on?
on. Iran has signed on repeatedly to what's called the Arab Peace Initiative of
Doesn't.
2002
Yeah.
and to the Arab Islamic Declaration in Riyadh in November 2023. Unfortunately, the New York Times doesn't carry these stories, by the
Yeah.
way. So if you
Yeah.
get your news from the New York Times, you're not getting your news.
Yeah.
Listen
One
to
of
Lawrence Krauss instead. You'll get much better news.
or Jeffrey Sachs is probably better. But anyway, yeah, no, okay. And one of the things you bring out in that regard, and by the way, I should say, in your writing, it's really the failure of journalism of late in the last bunch of mainstream journalism has really been a problem. But we don't have time for that. But some people would argue that, and the hardliners in Israel will argue, yeah, peace, but after we destroy Hamas. Hamas is a threat to the Israeli nation, and we'll first destroy Hamas and kill everyone, and then negotiate. Now, I will say that that's kind of a policy that in general hasn't worked well. I mean, I was sympathetic to it because those people are crazy, but there's 2 points that um, one that you haven't raised, the one that occurred to me immediately, is that was the same argument that we sort of applied in Afghanistan and Iraq, and all it did was result in massive destruction and death of the population, and never solved the problem. Iraq and in Afghanistan never solved the problem to claim you're going to destroy the terrorists, then everything will go away. That's the first question. But the other thing you point out is that Hamas really has never had the capability of destroying the Israeli nation. In fact, killed very few people per year compared to some extent, you would argue Israel attacks on Palestine. So maybe you could comment on both those
Well,
things.
just on the second point, the UN data, which I trust,
Hmm.
uh, shows that the civilian deaths from Palestinian attacks, civilian Israeli deaths, I should say, from Palestinian attacks, averaged six per year between 2007 and 2021. Now, six per year, you could say is sad, but unfortunately, in my neighborhood in New York, it's a greater number, no
Yeah.
doubt. We have shootings on both ends of our block, stabbings, other things. Come on, real life. Let's get real.
Hmm.
Hamas does not have an air force. Hamas does not have tanks. Hamas does not have anything that truly threatens Israel. Uh, do I believe in manning a border with Gaza? Yes, I do. Do I think that Israel let its guard down on October 7? Absolutely. But does Hamas threaten Israel? No. By the way, does Iran threaten Israel? Yes.
Hmm.
Of course it does. That's true of countries around the
Around the
world.
world.
We're all threatened. We have nuclear armed
Mhm.
countries. Iran's not nuclear armed. It could be
It
at
could be
some
because we
point.
may let them. Yeah.
There's no security in that way other than diplomacy.
Mm.
The idea that you eradicate all your foes is some kind of comic book description of the world,
Yeah,
which
in fact,
is, yeah,
in
which
fact,
it does
well,
not exist.
it does not exist. And one of your wonderful articles is diplomacy is the only way to solve the world problems. And it's sort of out of you point out there's diplomacy has disappeared when it comes to U.S. Russia relations, U.S. China relations. And, I was just actually listening, and I'm going to have a podcast with someone who's involved in super communication, who points out that negotiations, something that doesn't, certainly one of the people at least, and maybe both people who are running for president don't seem to get, that negotiations in the end have to be win-win. They can't be win-lose. That you don't go to a negotiation to get what you want and the other person loses everything. It never works. It never
You
works.
know, it's one of the great lines of the late Shimon Peres,
Mhm.
an Israeli leader, was you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. You
Yeah.
don't negotiate with your friends, you negotiate with your enemies. That's the whole point, to find the mutual accommodation so that both sides survive. That's
Yeah.
not so hard, but when you actually watch the diplomacy now as I do hour by hour, the US line is our friends and allies, our friends and allies. That's who we talk to, our friends and allies.
Realize.
Uh, well, talk to the other side,
Yeah.
damn it. Come
Yeah.
on.
Well,
Because that's where
that's
the
all
issue is.
that's all sensible. And again, I'm sorry to keep cutting in, but we don't have much time. Otherwise, I'd let you go on but the, but you have said something that, people, you have used the word apartheid and genocide when you talk about Israel. And I know I've heard people like Douglas Murray recently saying, look, there's a war and Israel is not, the genocide is an interesting thing. Are you systematically trying to destroy a population? And the argument is that war, and it's certainly, for example, in the U.S. war in Iraq, for many, many more, what, 500,000 to 1 million people were killed versus 30,000. I never heard the term genocide applied there. Maybe it should have been, but
Yep.
it wasn't. What's the difference? Why are you willing to use that word?
Well, the difference is it's not just me, by the way. There's
Yeah, yeah,
a,
yeah,
a case before the International Court
I
of
know.
Justice brought by South Africa. And the long part of the brief of South Africa, which people can find online, is the intent. Because under the 1948 Genocide Convention, the question of intent is crucial. And Israeli leaders like Bezalel Smotrich
Hmm.
or Itamar Ben Gvir, who are two cabinet ministers of great importance in the current government of Netanyahu, are so vulgar in their statements
Yeah.
and in what they've said that you look at it and say, oh my God, the intent is there. Now, shame on them. I think when they speak Hebrew to their followers, they don't think anyone's listening. But in this day, everyone's got a mobile phone, everyone's taping and posting everything. So we're hearing all of this stuff. We didn't hear in Iraq statements by the U.S. As much as I hated that war, so don't get me
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
I thought that war was so stupid, misguided, and on
Unbelievable.
phony print. But actually, Cheney did not say, as far as I know, we need to kill every one of those Iraqis, or we need to push the Iraqis out of Iraq. Or Iraq is ours, given to us by God.
He
No,
might have said the
it,
latter. I'm not sure, but
I know he may have said the oil was ours. I don't think he said it was given to us by God. But in any event, he did not say the things that the Israeli leaders, I think, not realizing the whole world is listening, have said to their followers. So
but
this is the intent question.
the question is, on the troops on the ground are not, are they intentionally murdering and killing Palestinians? The leaders are nuts. A lot of them will agree with that.
Yeah,
Um,
the
and
leaders have
and and
sent
and
the
I think
leaders have
when
sent
seeing
the
the public
soldiers
of
in.
in the recent times, when seeing the public in Israel finally, or maybe not finally, but effectively mobilizing against their leaders, right?
Yeah, the leaders have sent the Israeli Defense Forces into Gaza and have given an assignment and mission which is horrific and I believe in violation of the 1948 Genocide Convention. For example, the starvation
Hmm.
of hundreds of thousands of people is not a rhetorical flourish, it's an immediate reality. Okay, you don't starve hundreds of thousands of people. You don't,
Yeah.
under any circumstances, any form of war, and not be subject to the Genocide Convention. So the leaders are giving orders, and the leaders need to change their orders. And right now, I believe that Israel is extremely vulnerable. I think likely it will be found in violation of the Genocide Convention.
In fact, yeah, one of the things we don't have time for is you basically said one of your articles is saving Israel by ending its war in Gaza. It's the only way to save Israel, you think, is ultimately ending that. And 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 I hope that's the case. But that allows me a segment. I mean, in 10 minutes, I want to talk. It's not fair. I want to talk about two things you meant. One is the other boiling brew is Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is a remarkable piece by you on U.S. foreign policy is a scam built on corruption. So
Mhm.
let's go to Ukraine and then let's go to foreign policy in general and the corruption of the of also you talked about the CIA and there are facts in there that are remarkable and damning. It's really compelling reading and I recommend people read it. But look, one of the things you said about Ukraine is something that, again, I actually posted one of your pieces on my Substack site because it seems to me so eminently reasonable, and I can't understand why people don't recognize there's no way to win there's no way that Ukraine is going to defeat Russia in the sense of I mean, there's no way that war is going to end. It's
That's
just going to
correct.
keep going and going unless there are some discussions. But you do point out two things. One, which a lot of people, of course, disagree with, but a lot of it that Russia was provoked at least by the U.S. reneging on its agreements regarding NATO, which it clearly did. And the other two and three things, which I think are worth raising in the public's recognition, reneging on a NATO, um, the uh, the overthrow, the coup in 2014, and the U.S. efforts to sabotage agreements that would have produced a diplomatic end to the war. So why don't you spend 4 or 5 minutes talking about that?
Yeah,
Those three
I
things.
think that the main thing, and all of these points are related: the CIA, the U.S. foreign policy, and Ukraine. If people want to understand this war, just read one article. Read Zbigniew Brzezinski's article in Foreign Affairs in 1997 called "A Eurasia Strategy." Brzezinski, of course, was a very senior uh, international strategist for the U.S. and Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. Very clever. I liked him very much personally, and he helped very much on Poland's uh, uh, Poland's transformation. So I appreciated him very much. Very smart, by the way. But his view was we need to corner Russia and weaken Russia and make Russia a second rate or third rate power, or Russia maybe will fall apart like the Soviet Union fell apart. And I think it was Brzezinski's Polish fervor also with its anti-Russian history that helped animate those views. But 1997, he spelled it all out. NATO is going to expand. NATO is going to expand into the Black Sea. Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a great power. And he spelled that out also in a book called The Global Chessboard the same year. This is it. This has been playing out now for a quarter century. And for Russia, well, that's an existential threat. It would be like China declaring some clever Chinese analysts saying, well, China needs to contain the US, which is obviously anti-China. So we're going to put bases in Mexico, Venezuela, the Bahamas, throughout the Caribbean region, Canada, and so forth. And we'll tell the US we're peace loving and not to worry about it, but that's what we're going to do. Now, that's what we did vis-a-vis Russia. Russia said, no, please don't do that. Don't surround us. We don't want you all over our territory. And they kept saying that. And the Europeans, I know, because they told me, he said, you know, your guy, George W. Bush, yeah, he's a little out of control. We don't need this NATO push in 2008 to Ukraine. This is gonna go badly. Someone today sent me from an advisor of Jacques Chirac some advice to Chirac in 2006, I think it is, where Chirac says, we don't really want a war with Russia over this. So we walked into this. We thought we could do this without Russia objecting, or if they objected, so what? Or if they actually tried to resist, we would always win. We're the United States. We're the greatest power in the world. Russia's a pipsqueak. Russia's a gas station with nuclear weapons, as the phrase went. And basically, we walked into this. And for Russia, this was an existential threat. We don't want to be surrounded by the United States. And by the way, it wasn't just Ukraine. It's also the country of Georgia. Look at a map. How the hell could anyone say that that's a North Atlantic country, or that's a country that's going to shape the security of the North Atlantic states? That is a country that happens to be on the eastern border of the Black Sea, part of America's idea of surrounding Russia in the Black Sea. And note, one of the reasons why the Black Sea counts so much is that Russia has had its naval fleet in Sevastopol since 1783. And so the Black Sea is not just some incidental beachfront for Russia. It's absolutely fundamental. We walked into this when the Ukraine government said, maybe we don't want this. This is going to get us into a mess. We overthrew that government in 2014.
Something that's very important. People, you never hear about that. And
of course you don't hear about it.
Yeah.
And so all of this has a history of recklessness, of upping the ante, of playing a weak hand. And the hand is weak for a reason that Obama did recognize, and I give him credit for this. He recognized back in 2015, he used the expression actually, or an expression like it, escalatory dominance, that they could keep raising the stakes up to nuclear war. And in the end, we can't trump that. For us, it's, this is a good geopolitical play. If we get away with it and get NATO there, great, it's great, but it's not existential for us. The US doesn't depend on Ukraine being in NATO or the US having bases there, but for Russia, it's existential. And Obama realized, well, they've got nukes. They're gonna play their existential hand, where for us, it's a matter of convenience. I think most of the American strategists are stupid, by the way. I mean it in an intellectual sense. They don't think ahead. I'm, by the way, extremely unimpressed with most of our generals. Of course, I'm not talking about their military insights. I'm talking about their diplomatic ideas, because generals their job is not diplomacy. Their job is to fight a battle. Maybe they know something about that, so though sometimes you wonder. But when you put generals out in front of our policies, this is a absolutely wrong-headed approach. It's
we
not
have as
their
a general.
job.
We have a general as a member of the cabinet right now.
It's not their job. They don't get this stuff. Their job is weapons procurement or some strategy on a battlefield.
look, okay, why don't you just 1 minute talk about the you talk mentioned 2014, but I think it's important people to know that there was willingness to have a diplomatic solution early on in the conflict with Ukraine and
By
Soviet
the
Union,
way,
which US scuttled.
Russia wanted to have diplomacy for 30 years.
Yeah.
That I know for sure. I know it firsthand for sure. And we always said, no, we're the United States. We don't need to talk with you.
Yeah.
This is the basic idea. And then when Russia and Ukraine actually negotiated an end to the war 2 months after it started in Ankara, Turkey, with Turkish mediation, the US stopped it. Give me a break. I'm telling you, they're not clever, these people. They're playing a lousy hand the wrong way. They keep raising the stakes. It's obvious that this isn't going to work. I've written about it for years that it's just going to fail, aside from whatever one's
It's hard
views are.
whether it's going to, yeah, I mean, how it's going to fail is unusual, but just looking at this, saying how could this conflict ever end except for diplomacy? I cannot,
Yes,
it just seems impossible. This statement that we got to keep arming, we got to keep fighting, all it does is kill more people. And in the end, if it's going to end in any other way than Armageddon, it's got to end by people talking. I mean, I just don't see
that
if you asked a 6-year-old, in fact, Chomsky once said to me, if you ask a 5-year-old something, it's obvious to them, then it probably is true, and it's
well
but it's
that
amazing how our leaders, how we hear the opposite when.
I sometimes say, and I'm always corrected by my wife when I say it, I say they act like children. And my wife says, no, the children act better because these people are operating on a news cycle and spin. They are not thinking what we call it sub game perfection in game theory. How's this
Yeah.
going to play out?
You talk about game theory, and I wish we had time to talk about that because that negotiation is a big is a big question of game theory and how to when no one can win, how to ultimately have a game end effectively from the
Well,
prisoner's
one thing
dilemma.
I'll say about game theory that I think is scientifically interesting and valid. Most game theory, what's called non cooperative game
Yeah,
theory, is you don't talk to the other side in game theory.
yeah,
There is no communication.
yeah.
And the famous prisoner's dilemma, where you show that the two sides end up in a non cooperative mode, even though cooperation would be better for them, is this formalization where the story is that the prisoners are locked by their interrogators in separate rooms so that they're
Exactly.
not allowed to communicate. But in our world, I keep saying to the White House, damn it, use my Zoom if you want, but call Putin. Don't think you're locked in a separate room
Yeah,
because we
that's
can talk
exactly.
with each other.
The non-cooperative games actually only, you're right, only work without communication, and the communication faces that. Let me end with a question related to one of your U.S. policies, scam, belt, and corruption. Something that would amaze me. U.S. military-linked outlays in 2024 will come to around 1.5 trillion, or roughly $12,000 per household. Ultimately, the argument there, which is not new, is that foreign policy is really not being based on logic or altruism, as often said, or even necessarily effective self-interest of the country. It's based on self-interest of people who are making a lot of money. So Ukraine, there is a rational argument for sending weapons to Ukraine if the people controlling that discussion are the people who are making money by the sale of weapons. Coming back to something in Eisenhower, I think he was the first person to
Yes,
use the word military industrial complex. It's not new.
1961 farewell address.
Yeah, and so are we seeing is that at the root of this problem ultimately?
Yes, our problem started in 1947 with the National Security Act, which turned the U.S. into a security state, meaning that it is a state dominated by uh, security considerations, the military, secrecy, the CIA as an operative secret army, and what happened over time, a network of 800 overseas military bases in 80
In
countries.
80 countries.
You know, you've got a lot of hardware all over the world. You've got a lot of military personnel all over the world. This is a huge, lucrative enterprise, and it is, it's about $1 trillion in direct military Pentagon outlays, and you add in the CIA, you add in Homeland Security, you add in veterans costs, which are enormous. Uh, that's if you want, you can attribute a piece of the debt to all of these wars and the debt service. $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, 1.5 trillion is a reasonable expression of this. Boy, that's a hell of a lot of money, it funds so many university institutes. It funds so many think tanks. It funds so many individuals. It advertises so much in the mainstream media. This is America's big business. It's not the only one.
The racket, as you point out, it's a racket.
It's a racket, and we got a lot of spokesmen for it, and a lot of, as I say, the universities are deeply implicated, unfortunately, because they got a lot of money from this.
Yeah.
And you look at where we get our information. Check out the donor box. Check out your donors in Congress on opensecrets.org, and you can begin to see how this racket works.